see a picture, Prof, but I don't see the moving video.
Oh,
What video?
oh, okay.
You talk with the Professor David or me? Sorry.
Hello. Looks
hello.
good to meet you. It's very nice
to meet you too. Yes, I think this is the first time that I met you in person, sort of, almost in person. With Pa Victor, I think I met you previously in.
We met in
yeah.
I think Honiara also, yeah.
Yeah, Honiara, 2016 or 15 during the MSG summit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how's Auckland, Professor?
Very cold at the moment.
It's cold now?
Even in the office.
Even in the office. Oh no. Okay.
Yeah. I feel warmed up when I see the background. You know.
Yes. How's the movement of people? I mean, is it still restricted?
Yes, very restricted. Basically, the New Zealand government thinks that it's going to be able to succeed in keeping out COVID completely, but it all depends on this very strict enforcing of the borders. So I think we're going to have our borders closed for a very long time. The only people coming into the country are New Zealanders living in other countries and returning.
What about the Australian bubble?
It's hard with the Victoria. You know, they've got a big spike in Melbourne and Victoria now, so that's dashed the bubble plans for the moment.
We were also thinking about having our own bubble here in Indonesia with a number of Asian countries.
Right.
Still in the very beginning, yeah, Pak Victoria.
Yeah.
But I hope I can come and visit Auckland again sometime. I went there last year, 2019.
Oh, right.
When we had the Pacific Exposition.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yes.
I visit Auckland, I think 2015, huh?
2015.
Yeah, 2015.
On your way to Honiara?
No. I have a meeting there in Professor campus.
Yeah.
But my family is still in Australia now. I could not go there because the restriction,
yeah,
for Indonesian citizen.
And I couldn't go to that meeting because ironically I was in Indonesia.
Okay, Professor David and Pak Made. So our meeting is I will give this forum for first speaker for Professor Robi, and after that Pak Sade. Both of you have a presentation or no?
I will.
No presentation, huh?
I'll just speak orally.
Okay. So if you have a presentation, you can use share screen, because I give you access to share your screen, And I will introduce you, Pak Sade. Currently, he is a director for European Affairs, first Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia. He is currently based in Jakarta as a deputy. Before he worked as a director for European Affairs, he was a deputy director for Asia and the Pacific. His portfolio includes advancing Indonesia's relationship with Australia, New Zealand, Samoa, Tonga, and Vanuatu. Prior to that, he served with Indonesian mission in Canberra, Australia as the embassy spokesperson and counselor for political affairs from 2014 till 2018. Good? Something wrong?
No, we're all good.
Okay.
Yes.
All good? Yeah. Then Professor David, David Robbie is director of the Pacific Media Center. He is a New Zealand author, journalist, and media educator who has covered the Asia Pacific region for international media for more than 2 decades. He became an associate professor in Auckland University of Technology School of Communication Studies in 2005, and then he became a professor in 2011. How do you think, Professor David?
Okay.
Are good?
Yeah. Plenty.
Okay, we can start now, huh?
Do you like me to fire away?
Sorry?
Do you like me to start now?
Yeah, I think we now it's the 3, Jayapura, and 1 in Jakarta, and 6
Good.
in
All right.
Auckland.
Right.
Okay.
Selamat malam.
Selamat malam. Hi everyone. We are here to discuss something about the Papua land. It's about the information, how we can understand Papua land information. There's many information come from Papua land, including Papua province and West Papua province, spreading out to many countries, especially in Pacific. But then the question is coming: what the information? Yeah? Why the information is like a black hole? Because people in Pacific, they use the information from social media, because many website who publish the information from Papua land to people outside, for the people outside, but the information is not clear yet. So they're trying to look from other resources, yeah? Like a social media, video, film, many things. And we have 2 speakers here. First is Professor David Robbie. Professor David Robbie is a director of the Pacific Media Center. He is a New Zealand author, journalist, and media educator who has covered the Asia Pacific region for international media for more than 2 decades. He became an associate professor in Auckland University of Technology School of Communication Studies in 2005, and he became a professor in 2011. And the second speaker is Pak Sade Bimantara. Currently, he is a director for First European Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic Indonesia. Before working as a director for European Affairs, First European Affairs, he was a deputy director for Asia and the Pacific. His portfolio includes advancing Indonesia's relationship with Australia, New Zealand, Samoa, Tonga, and Vanuatu. Prior to that, he served in Indonesian mission in Canberra, Australia, as the embassy spokesperson and counselor for political affairs from 2014 till 2018. So that's 2 speakers now. But I will give forum for first speaker. That's Professor Robbie. So, as I said before, we will discuss about how we can understanding the Papua land. From you living in outside Papua, you in the Pacific continent, you know the Pacific peoples, they always use many sources, yeah, many information sources from about West Papua. I mean, mostly they use the social media also, because you talked to me that you told me that there's difficult to get the information from mainstream media, yeah, in West Papua and also in Indonesia. So, Professor David, could you explore what your opinion about the information, how you can understand, how the Pacific people can understanding Papuan issues? I give you the floor. Go on.
Thanks. Yes, so salam malam, salamat malam, and in my indigenous greeting from Aotearoa, New Zealand, kia ora katoa. If I could just start off to talk about a indigenous proverb that we have in my country. It's called Kua tokoto te manaka, which means the leaves of the manaka tree have been laid down, and that's a tradition for the indigenous marae in my country when visitors come, that the leaves of the manaka laid down, and then it depends on how the leaves are picked up, whether the challenge comes in peace or as an enemy. Very interesting sort of tradition. So I'd like to make a few general overview, because I think one of the big challenges for the media in this region is the complexity of the issues in West Papua and the difficulties of gaining information. So for more than half a century, the challenges in West Papua have the people of Melanesia and Papuan region, more often than not, the challenge has been addressed with repression and censorship, which has made it difficult, particularly with the gagging of information and so on. So the global reporting of Papua and the issues of self-determination and so on have been given an enormous and unprecedented boost since the so-called Papua uprising last year. Those events have led to two major documentaries, for example, in the last couple of months. I think of particularly the one was called The War for West Papua, which screened on ABC's Foreign Correspondent in May. And then we also had the Selling Out West Papua about the palm oil industry on Al Jazeera, particularly on that program 101 East. And both of these have been widely viewed in the last couple of months. They both were powerful and stunningly colorful productions, and they underscore the vital need for global news media to form strong relationships with local Papuan journalists when producing current affairs documentaries. And in both cases, for these two documentaries, these most recent ones, this happened. Due to the extreme difficulties for journalists getting visas through the government's clearinghouse in Jakarta, the ABC production by Sally Sarah drew on journalists on the ground in Papua. And in the case of Selling Out program, the producers relied on a ruse. So the crew filmed the Wasur National Park in the massive wetlands near Merauke. Well, actually, they also did investigation as well. That was a documentary by Drew Ambrose and the International Environmental Organization, Mongabai. So for the purpose of this webinar, I'd like to raise the issue of a free flow of information that will raise the awareness and understanding of the many complex issues at stake in both provinces, Papua and West Papua. As both a journalist and a media academic, I've often referred to the West Papua information black hole, as you referred to Victor, in various articles and videos since I wrote my first article back in 1983, when I met a number of Papuan activists and journalists at the Nuclear Free and Independent Pacific conference in Port Vila. That was back in 1983. And other journalists have also referred to this black hole or black spot. If we go back to a basic issue here, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 19, is quite clear on what should be best practice. So everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media, regardless of frontiers. But there are two sides to this coin. The rights enable us to expose, to communicate and condemn human rights abuses, for example, but they also celebrate or they enable the celebration of human rights achievements. So freedom of expression embraces free speech, the sanctity of an individual's opinion, a free press, the transmission and receipt of ideas and information, the freedom of expression in art and other forms, the ability to receive ideas from elsewhere, such as the rest of the South Pacific, and also the right to silence. So this search for truth and free flow of information and ideas informs political debate and is a safety valve for human rights. I'll just mention that part of our role at the Pacific Media Centre is to publish books and resources that inform and underpin journalism, including publishing the only specialist Asia Pacific research journal, Pacific Journalism Review, which we publish this twice a year. You recognise this person here, but and we also have a new edition coming out in a few weeks' time, and this edition is actually devoted to research papers from the Papuan and Melanesian issues at the the Melanesian Media Freedom Forum, which was held in Brisbane in November at Griffith University. And this forum considered a range of Melanesian media freedom issues. And I'll just pick out a few of these salient points as they apply to the media and government relating to West Papua. In the preamble, for example, the participants representing media from Fiji, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, West Papua, they declared their concern about growing threats to media freedom in the region. And they called on media industry members and other organisations and individuals to take action to help secure the future of the Fourth Estate as a vital pillar of democracy. And they noted that a better understanding is needed of the role of journalism in Melanesian democracies. They also noted that the media is ready to work with all parties that want to improve the social media landscape. The range of threats to media freedom has been increasing over recent years. And these include restrictive legislation, intimidation, political threats, legal threats and prosecutions, assaults, and police and military brutality, illegal detention, online abuse, racism between ethnic groups, and the ever-present threats facing particularly younger and female reporters. And they noted that the situation in West Papua was a particular concern with attacks on journalists resulting in deaths and injuries. They also raised the unwillingness of politicians and officials around the region to engage in dialogue, and that was undermining the media's accountability role. They also pointed to the global decline of democracy as making it easy for our governments to silence the media. And also they raised issues of misinformation, propaganda, and fake news, which is a growing problem right across the world now. But they also had some specific, this is the Melanesian Media Freedom Forum, they had some specific recommendations for the Indonesian government to stop criminalizing journalists, to allow access to foreign journalists, parliamentarians and independent observers to West Papua, particularly to gain much better information, much more accurate information and so on for that hopefully that will be broadcast in their local media. So investigate and bring to justice those responsible for attacks on journalists, end state-sponsored misinformation and disinformation about Papua, and also to stop the racist stigmatization of Indigenous journalists, for example. But some of these sentiments expressed in this forum have been widely echoed and reflected by global media freedom and advocacy groups such as Reporters Without Borders, which I personally work with quite a lot, the New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists, and Freedom House. Well, Freedom House, for example, said in its latest global report, it praised Indonesia for an impressive gains since the fall of the authoritarian regime back in 1998 by establishing significant pluralism in politics and the media and undergoing multiple peaceful transfers of power between parties. However, it also pointed out that the country continues to struggle with challenges, including systemic corruption, discrimination, and violence against minority groups, separatist tensions, for example, and the politicized use of defamation and blasphemy laws. The country's, Indonesia's score declined from 4 to 3 in the civil liberties category due to this accumulative effect of government restrictions on the public use of the public Papuan flag, the Morning Star, arrests of Papuans expressing their desire for independence, etc., etc. Reporters Without Borders, they also had a report that came out recently at the time of Media Freedom Day, and that they said the presidency at the moment had been marked by drastic restrictions on media access to West Papua, where violence against local journalists continues to grow. Foreign journalists and local fixers are liable to be arrested and prosecuted, and both those who try to document the goings-on and so on have faced harassment and so on. So that was RSF's report, but they actually, RSF gave Indonesia a rise of 5 positions overall because of improvements elsewhere in the Republic. Now, the Committee to Protect Journalists, they condemned the internet shutdown last year, saying that it blocks the free flow, of information in a region notorious for rights abuses. So they were very critical of that. But just last week, and that was an illustration that we had ourselves in our own news website here at the university, Asia Pacific Report. You look it up, it's Asia Pacific Report.nz. We published a story about a Tongan Kiwi beauty queen. Her name is Diamond Longi, and she made a fairly low-key solidarity statement on behalf of Papuans and expressing empathy for political prisoners at this moment. Well, she was immediately denounced and abused by thousands of social media trolls, and she was forced to close down her Instagram account and render her Facebook account non-active. And among the countless trolls was this comment, if I can just sort of share that with you. I'll have to get my glasses here. Right, yes, well, this is just one example of the sort of messages which is not helpful for information on Papua. Anyway, she said, this commenter said, well, that woman, Diamond Longi, probably poisoned by hoax, ordered or bribed in this era, she should have known not to trust easily, even if 100 or 1,000 people gave her information that she's not yet checked, whether it's a fact or not. That's why many Indonesians, including our brothers and sisters of West Papua, are angry about that woman. Please tell her she's not the most and the only one who fights for humanity. Did she think that Indonesia is inhuman? Indonesian people don't have to study politics just to know what others are plotting or scheming. So basically her message went on in that sort of vein. But we've noticed quite a lot of messages going on our websites too. And I hear from other journalists in New Zealand, not that the mainstream does very much media coverage of Papua, partly because mostly the mainstream finds it extremely difficult to get the information. Anyway, so I think I mentioned too that I think the one story that has actually been given quite a bit of play in countries like New Zealand and Australia just recently are about those who've been imprisoned just recently about raising the Papuan flag. And it's unfortunate, and Indonesian authorities get a bad rap from international media when these cases become before the law courts. Groups, and international groups such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and TAPOL are among those international advocacy groups that have called for immediate and unconditional release of all prisoners from Papua and Maluku. For what they say is peacefully exercising their rights. But among those, Indonesian civil rights advocates have been among those prominent in condemning these sentences. For example, Usman Hamid, Executive Director of Amnesty International in Indonesia, who says the charges against them are baseless. And he's mentioned that all 7 of the recent ones that have been jailed are prisoners of conscience, persecuted solely for peacefully exercising their human rights. So basically, I've pretty well got most of my comments that I was going to make. I have a few questions that I would like to share after a colleague from the ministry. I believe he's going to speak next. So I've got a few questions that we might discuss at a later point. So. Terima kasih.
Okay, thank you, Professor David. We have some notes from you, but we will discuss later. But now I would like to give a forum to Pak Sade. Silakan Pak Sade.
Thank you, Pace Victor, and kia ora tatou, Professor David Robbie. It's nice to be here, and it is an honor for me to be sharing the floor, or is it the virtual Zoom here with the two of you. Now, let me again introduce myself. My name is Sade Bimantara, full name Ida Bagus Made Bimantara. You can tell from my full name that I come from Bali, and it is a quiet, triple minority here in Indonesia, and you can see triple minorities like me all over Indonesia. I am a Hindu. I come from a small island, and I come from the ethnic Balinese. And I also come from a generation of the Reformation movement of 1998. I was a student back then, 1998. So when you were telling me, Professor, about the call for more freedom, including media freedom, I can empathize and I can sympathize, and I do understand where you are coming from. So thank you very much for that. I want to talk about information in Papua, in Tanah Papua. Unfortunately, Professor, many commentators and many people throughout, not just the Pacific, but throughout the world, I think, some communities view Indonesia from the prism or lens of the 1980s and 1970s. Even now, a Lowy poll just released last week found that 89% of Australians think that Indonesia is not a democracy. 59% of Australians, and these are people who have access to internet, who live in towns and cities and other places with broadband. And I cannot imagine how people in the Pacific view Indonesia. I have some facts about media access to Papua and some information about Papua, but more on this just a little bit later. To begin, let me share a few points, if I may, Professor and Pace Victor. My first point is that Indonesia, including Papua, is a story of transformation. We started from a colony of a far-flung Western empire. We were the subject of slavery, forced labor, land thefts, murders throughout many years under the Dutch colonial system. But through blood, sweat, and tears, we organized and united ourselves, and in 1945 became a republic, one nation. And one nation composed of a multicultural and multi-faith population spread in thousands of islands, big and small, here throughout Indonesia. Even our national motto reflects that fact and determination, which is unity in diversity. And this story of transformation is still being written until today, Professor. You see it in the streets of Jakarta last September, for example, where people were demonstrating and 10 of the demonstrators were killed. They were protesting in defense of a cause, which was anti-corruption back then. And you see in the hashtag Papuan Lives Matter as well, where netizens, not just Papuans, but Balinese like myself, Javanese, Sumatran, Bugis, reminds and demands for our brothers in Papua to live in peace, where discrimination or racism has no place. So yes, we have empathy for that, and we want the same for our brothers and sisters also in Papua. And you see it in the crowds of civil servants, law enforcers, lawmakers, business people, students, and the average mom and pop in Indonesia who wake up every day to do the right thing, to correct what was wrong and bring the Indonesian story an inch closer to its ideals. And this brings me to my second point, Professor and Pa Victor, that this transformation has gone for almost 75 years. In comparison, the United States has been at it for 244 years since 1776. Australia, 232 years since 1788. And New Zealand, 180 years since 1840. And their stories, as much as ours, are still being written. But this is by no means an excuse on some failures to deliver basic services to guarantee that everyone is treated equal. I have been a protester back in the day. I too have been at the receiving end of protests recently, both when I was in Canberra and also recently here in Jakarta, on issues close to the hearts of Papuans. And my approach, and I understand also that the approach of my government is that we meet with the protesters, we listen to the protesters, and if allowed, to talk with the protesters, and then find out a solution that is best for everyone. And I guarantee that those grievances are brought to the attention of the respective authorities to be acted upon, and the integrity of information is crucial in this matter, which brings me to my third point, Professor, on the need to ensure that information, including in the land of Papua, and I agree very much with what you just said, information should flow freely, should be fact-based, and treat the viewers and listeners with respect and facts they deserve. That is why it is so important, I think, to look out and fight against infodemics that is spreading together with the COVID-19 pandemic here, unfortunately. For example, take the take the unsubstantiated claim of genocide or slow motion genocide of Papua that some people like Benny Wenda have been trying to sell all over the world. The fact is there is no and was never a genocide. this fact is not coming from my mouth or even my government mouth, but it is coming from the International Crisis Group 2006 report and also a 2016 Sydney University study. And I can share you the link later on. Or take the claim that Papua and West Papua are not free. Sure, there were some cases where the freedom of individuals and groups were abused, the cases that you mentioned, for example. Some cases have been brought to court, such as the Surabaya racism incident. I believe the person was convicted and jailed for that act. But Professor, these cases were isolated and in no way reflect government policy. It is not systematic government policy. I can assure you of that. In fact, the opposite is the case. The government put in place a very robust and strong policy of affirmative action in Papua and nationally. I am sure you know, Professor and Pak Victor, that 44 out of the 44 local leaders in Papua and West Papua provinces are of Papuan heritage. Can you imagine the same policy in Jakarta, where only Betawis, which is the native of Jakarta, they are only allowed to be in office? If such an affirmative policy exists in Jakarta, there will be no governor and now President Jokowi because he's from Java. There will be no investment chief Bahlil because he's from Papua. There will be no police chief and no minister and now Minister Tito because he's from Sumatra. Can you imagine that same affirmative policy happening in the Wellington regional area? You will see all of the Wellington city councillors being Maoris and not English, Irish, or Scottish, or from some other ethnicities. And I am sure you also know that the budget of Papua and West Papua, with a population of about 4.5 million, is the same as the budget of West Java, with a population 10 times that of West Papua and Papua, 45 million. And I am certain that you know that 2.7 million Papuan voters went to the ballots in 2014, 2017, and 2019 to cast their vote in an internationally recognized free and fair elections to vote. And I am sure you know that despite its flaws, journalists and members of media are free to come and go to Papua. And this brings me to my last point, Professor. Journalists and media access to Papua is much more open than what is often ill portrayed in social media today. First, the president himself, President Jokowi, is personally leading the way. One, putting emphasis on a more humane approach where development and economic policies that touches the lives of ordinary Papuans to bring justice, to bring stability, prosperity front and center of any policies, nationally or locally. And you can see these policies in action. The release of a number of Papuan prisoners back in 2015, 16, and 17. The commitment and directive to resolve past cases of human rights violations. While it is slow in making progress, it is advancing and national effort to improve and upgrade the Papua Special Autonomy Law. And two, the President's directive to ensure free and unimpeded media access to Papua. While it has been slow to trickle down the bureaucratic ladder, Professor, it has resulted in a number of things. First, robust and wide 4G data and communication access throughout even the remotest areas of Papua is now available. the internet access limitation that you mentioned, Professor, in late 2019 was an exception to the rule, and it was put to put a brake on the spreading of hate crime, incitement to violence, and racist content and materials. And it was only throttled down the spreading of videos and pictures, but not text. And this was also carried out in Jakarta during the riots of 21st and 22nd May 2019. So it was not just in Papua, but also in Jakarta. And third, the Indonesian national media and foreign correspondents and foreign journalists, they are free to go anytime to Papua. Contrary to what you said, Professor, they can go in and out of Papua. And when going out of their base, for example, their base is in Surabaya or Jakarta, this foreign correspondent, they can go anywhere in Indonesia, including to Papua. They only need to give notification of where they are going. For example, they're going to Borneo, they're going to Bali, they're going to Papua. They only need to give notification, but do not need to ask any permit. And also these directives and the highest political commitment resulted in a much clearer and speedier process for overseas foreign journalists. The person or group apply for a journalist visa at the Indonesian mission, for example, in Wellington or in Canberra, and they need only to fill 2 pages of form. 2 pages of form for a journalist visa. When I want to go to Australia, I need to fill 50 pages of form for a visa. And when I need to go to New Zealand, I need to fill 16 pages of form for a visa. And in that form, you let know where the places you want to go. And if you say you want to go to Kalimantan, Borneo, or Papua, then it will go through the process here, and the government will say yes or no and publish that visa. And this can happen actually. From my record in 2016 to 2020, out of the 69 applications, 55 was approved, which means 80% was approved. And the current restriction has got to do with the COVID-19 restriction. And the previous restriction has got to do with the riots happening in some parts of Papua and also some parts of Jakarta. So we think coverage and false rumors and help shed light.
Halo, Pak Sade. Hello.
We lost Sade.
We lost him, huh? Yeah?
Yes, I can't see. He's off my menu bar.
Yeah, I think we lost him.
Hopefully we can get him back. Can I make a couple of points, especially those last points that Sade was discussing? I think
wait, sorry, yeah. Wait.
Right. Oh, good.
Sorry, he come.
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Can
Right.
you know why you losing your connection, huh?
Oh, back to me. But can I just clarify, Sade, about the...
Okay, you can. Yeah. Sorry, I think we lost him again. And I think
Right.
you can give a
Sure. Okay, so the question I was going to raise, hopefully he might be able to hear this and so on, but when he was discussing that under President Jacobi, that there's greater freedom of journalists being able to go to Papua, and the freedom of correspondence based in Jakarta to be able to go there and so on. In theory, this is very much the theory, but in practice, very, very few journalists from my part of the world, this is Australia, New Zealand, or any of the Pacific countries, actually managed to get to Papua. And the most successful case, I think, that we've had is in 2015, where the policy was very much
Hello,
freed
can
up.
you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, Professor David. Pasade is back, so
Okay.
later you can ask your question to Pasade. Huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello. You want the question? So I can continue the question, is it? Or
no, we try. I don't know why, but this is his connection. Right?
There's two.
Yeah, go ahead. You can.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, sorry. Sorry. Yeah. So my question there was just picking up on that point that you raised about under the policy of President Jacobi, we've got much greater freedom, as you were saying, for journalists to go to Papua, and there's greater freedom for journalists to go from Jakarta, foreign correspondence, etc., and so on. But my point is that in practice, the journalists are not going from Australia, New Zealand, or the Pacific. And what the feedback that I get from journalists is that the bureaucratic process and the clearinghouse in Jakarta is extremely difficult to get through, if you like, to get permission to go. And so this is actually a very obstruction, if you like, in journalists wanting to go and report on Papua.
Victor, can you listen to me?
Sorry?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What happened with your connection, Pasade?
Okay, I'm online now, yeah? All right, okay. So just a few more minutes.
Are your connection is good now?
Yeah, my connection is good. This has never happened to me.
What happened?
With Zoom and here.
What happened with you? Your connection, I mean.
Oh, we're back to me.
Stop. Sorry, wait, David.
I should introduce the other two people here. Sri Krishnamurthy is actually the Pacific Media Watch journalist, my colleague here, and Del is, in fact, a colleague researcher here, but I gave them the link to connect with this discussion.
Okay, Pasade is joined now with his mobile phone. I hope it will be solve the problem, yeah? I don't know what happened with your connection, his connection.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sorry, who is this?
Hello, can you hear me?
Krishnamurthy.
No, sorry, not question now.
Krishnamurthy.
No question yet.
No questions yet, Sri.
Okay.
Victor, can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you now. We lost you, yeah?
My phone now.
Okay, you can continue what.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I need a few more minutes, so bear with me, Professor. Okay, as I said, in 2016 to 2020, out of the 69 application, 55 was approved, which is an 80% rate. And again, we would like to thank those journalists, including you, Prof. Robbie, and you, Victor, who have been responsible and professional and applied the highest ethical standards of your profession, who have covered all sides and stories and helped to debunk false rumors and irresponsible reporting, and help shed light to many important and difficult topics which you have previously also mentioned, Professor. Having said that, let me close with the following point, that we must do more to fight infodemics. We must be more balanced in writing news, which is fact-based and not biased opinions. And we must cover both sides at all times. Check and recheck statements, and if in doubt, do not write or spread it. Any lives wrongfully killed, families destroyed, be they ethnic Papuans or otherwise, deserve justice and media attention all the same. Now, where was then the attention to the destructive and fatal consequence when Benuenda, the leader of the ULM-WP, proclaimed the Vanimo Declaration, stating that 3 West Papuan main and largest armed groups was now under his single command, unified. Let me quote, "Politically and militarily, we are ready to take over our country." This, in effect, is an invitation to Papuans to undertake armed uprising. And this was said by the BBC Stephen Sakur during Hard Talk with Benuenda. And where was the media attention when that same group, headed by Benuenda, took the lives of 19 young men, civilians working on a road project in Duga, were murdered in cold blood, their hands tied behind their backs, while a group of armed criminals butchered them like animals. They say for a cause to free West Papua. I can share you the pictures later on, Professor. It's gruesome, but I think it's important for all of us to see it. And finally, those calling for the separation of Papua, who are based overseas, who died and made them king of Papua. Last I checked, 2.7 million Papuan voters elected the Papuan leaders in Papua, and not those living in comfort in the UK, Australia, US, and elsewhere. And last I checked, Papuans enjoy free and fair democracy. They are free to vote, free to govern, free to determine their future. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Pak Sade, for your point. We have some question also for your point, but I hope you not lose. We will not lose you again. Okay. Now we move to the question and answer. Professor David, you can make a comment for Pak Sade, and after that, Pak Sade can make a comment also for Professor Robbie. And then we can move to the question from the viewers in YouTube, yeah? Okay, Professor David, I give the floor to you.
Thank you, Pak Sade. That's very interesting and very illuminating. I was very keen to get clarification on your comments about generally the freedom of journalists supposedly to come to or go to Papua with President Jokowi's open policy that began in 2015. The problem that I've experienced with a lot of journalists is that in theory, this is the case, that there's supposed to be a more open policy and it's a lot easier to go to Papua. But in reality, for a lot of the journalists is the bureaucratic process that they have to go through the clearinghouse in Jakarta is actually quite difficult and extremely complicated to get through. My own personal view is that I think one of the things that would really help a better information and better understanding of the situation. I've been to Indonesia many times myself. We have partnerships with institutions over there and so on as well. The greater the interaction and the greater the reporting, if you like, would increase the understanding generally. And I think one of the difficulties that certainly we encounter, and say in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is that most of the mainstream media don't cover either Papua or Indonesia generally issues, as we found with the recent election. And of course, in these COVID times, what is happening in Indonesia should be of immense interest to us in Aotearoa and New Zealand and so on as well. So the point is that if there are more journalists able to go and see for themselves, report on issues and developments that are happening, for example, the development that you've been referring to, there would be much greater understanding. The problem is that there is a view that because it's difficult for journalists to go, the barriers are there, what is there to hide? And I think that's a perception in some of the mainstream media. But on the other hand, I would say that there is some media in Australia and New Zealand that are extremely well informed and do a very credible and thorough job. For example, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, radio, as known these days as RNZ Pacific. There are two divisions. There's the national and there's the Pacific division. Extremely thorough and good reporting that generally comes from RNZ Pacific. So kudos, but what we need is more of the reporting. And I'd like to mention in 2015, when President Jacoby, when the policy was supposed to have come in, I still question, whether it's really as free as you've mentioned so far. But in 2015, we had quite a breakthrough for Aotearoa, New Zealand, because we had two television, one is actually RNZ, about they did video filming and so on as well. So two crews actually went to Papua and did a number of stories. And I'd say that that year was probably the most reporting that we've actually had in the media in New Zealand. And one particular story that struck me as very quite innovative was about the New Zealand Aid Project up in the highlands in Papua, the growing of kumara, sweet potato, which is a staple in New Zealand and various varieties and that sort of thing. That story had enormous interest in New Zealand on Māori television. It was broadcast, but those are the sort of stories. There are a lot of stories that can be told, which would increase understanding and also be awareness of the developments. Along with that, a journalist who recently had a book published, the road it's called, John Martinkus. I wondered what your view was of that book, which wrote fairly extensively on the Trans-Papua Highway, and it was quite critical in many respects. And he's travelled extensively in Papua, of course, but these are quite important issues that he's raised. I just wondered if you have some comments about his book, just published just a few weeks ago.
Okay, thank you, Professor David. Masadi, I heard that I know that you should leave at.
I still have some time.
Sorry?
I'm still here.
You still have a time, huh?
Still here.
Yes. No, you need to leave 30 minutes ago, huh?
No,
No?
I'm
Okay, so
yeah.
you can answer and make a comment for Professor David. I give the
Yes.
floor to you.
In replying to you, Professor David, on the technical details for foreign journalists and foreign correspondents here in Indonesia to go into Papua or other parts of Indonesia, it is actually not that difficult. As you said, in theory, it is quite easy and not cumbersome at all. For foreign correspondent based in Jakarta, for example, they need only to give a notification to the authorities of where they are going, and then they can freely go, including into Papua. And for the foreign journalists based overseas, of course, they need to get the visa, which we can have it within 7 to 14 days, so long as they meet all the requirements, including letting us know where they plan to visit, where they plan to go, and what stories they plan to write, and so on and so forth. And I know also very well of the intergovernment process to vet for those journalists coming into Indonesia. That process happens every week, end of the week, and it's quite an open and transparent process among government officials to see. So if you have a particular case, Professor Robi, of if you know someone who has gotten into difficulties, we can help to check it out and perhaps speed up the process. So that's my first point on the technical to get the visa and notification to go to Papua. And my second comment is on the principle of having an open access and media freedom throughout Indonesia, including to Papua, as what was said by President Jokowi back in 2015. We fully agree with that principle, and I understand that all the government agencies are working to implement it. It's not perfect, as you said. There are some bureaucracy involved, but the spirit is there, and the effort to make it as easy as possible for people to travel and to report all over Indonesia is strong here in Indonesia. And you mentioned the RNZ Pacific. Yeah, I've spoken a couple of times with Johnny Blades. Yeah, he writes a lot about the Pacific and about Papua as well. And Aotearoa in 2015. If you have any more plan or programs for Aotearoa or RNZ Pacific, please come and talk to us here, and we will be more than willing to help and speed up the process. And as regards to John Martinkus' book about the Trans-Papua Highway that has just been released, I have only wrote the excerpt of it, but I have not read the full book. So I'm looking forward to sitting down perhaps over the weekend to read this book. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Pak Sade and Professor David. So, Pak Sade, when you said something about Johnny Blades, I remember that I worked with him when he come to West Papua, and you know, when he apply his visa, he wrote my name as a fixer, and then he need to show my picture with President Jokowi to make staff there and Indonesian embassy in New Zealand believe and give permit to him. And I have many experience about the visa, journalist visa. My friends want to come to West Papua. Last year, I worked with Al Jazeera for the recent stories. He can come to West Papua, Drew Ambrose. He have a visa and he enter West Papua. But the other one, the ABC crew, and he could not come here because the visa problem also. So it is a little bit confused for them. So maybe if you already talk about we talk already about the technically, the techniques problem in the embassy. So maybe sometime we can ask you to help foreign journalists to come here. So there's and for Professor David, this many questions here in YouTube that say that foreign journalists, especially in Australia and New Zealand, they'll always wrote a story only about the separatism. Do you agree about that or no? And how do you, as a journalist, how do you make a verificating the information who come across who come from the Indonesian side? And for my question also for Pak Sade, do you know about the fake side? I mean, the fake news and many. We did investigation last year, and we found lot of fake website, who write this, what we call is a disinformation about Papua land. You know about that or no? Thank you. This is the question from the viewers. Professor David, I give you the floor to answer the question.
Sure. Yes, I think that's a valid criticism that not enough has been. The first point there about that journalists in Australia and New Zealand concentrate solely on the issue of self-determination and so on. The issue, there are a lot of other issues that could be and should be reported about Papua. The development issues, social issues, and so on. And that's why I made that point about the Māori television's story that they did about the Kumina aid project, for example. But those sort of stories can only really be done if journalists actually get to Papua. And sadly, I have to say that although we had the 2 crews from New Zealand that came up in 2015, we haven't had any since, and that's rather disappointing. I find that personally very disappointing. I know from our centre we try to encourage as wide a range of articles and issues to be reported and written about as possible. I think it's the tendency of media generally is globally is can often focus on conflict type issues. So I think we have to go to the extra mile, if you like, to try and encourage and enable opportunities for journalists to be able to go see for themselves and to do stories about issues. So for example, the really important issues that were raised about in the selling of sellout of West Papua, the one to do with the palm oil industry and the deforestation, and some major environmental issues. Those sorts of issues also have to be covered, and the sort of complexity of issues in Papua. So that once again, it comes back to enabling and ensuring that there's opportunities for journalists to come. I don't know what the answer is there, because as we know, the policy is supposed to be free, but in practice, I found very few journalists that have actually been able to successfully go through that process of getting visas. Now, the other issues that you raised, Victor, about fake news, that's a major issue too. You see, and I think this is one of the reasons why some media don't really touch stories about Papua, and because of the difficulty of verifying, cross-checking stories and so on. So media that do cover the issues often work very closely with international news agencies and services that actually have journalists on the ground, or stringers or correspondents in Papua. And also these disinformation websites is a really big problem, but that's, of course, it's a global scourge, if you like, a challenge for all of us to identify these sites and and to expose them.
Okay, thank you, Professor David. So, Pak Sade, now
But
your
yeah, on your first point of fixer and also cases of had trouble to go into Papua, I cannot comment on specific cases because first I don't know the case, and secondly, of course, this is with public discussion and it's not right to discussing publicly. But a fixer need to be registered in our Ministry for Culture, and he has or she has to have a tax number. The fixer. So you have to make sure that the fixer is the right person, and then you fill the right form and also submit all the necessary documentation. And on your comment, Professor, of a more open and easier access to Papua, I think, as I said, it is quite easy at the moment, and any journalist wanting to come just need to go through the procedure. And if you encounter any difficulties, Professor Robi, please come directly to me, and we can help to sort that out. In fact, when I was in Canberra, I was posted in Canberra before, we organized a number of journalist visits into Indonesia, including to Papua, from journalists from the Pacific and Australia and also New Zealand, I think it was. And at first they didn't know much about Indonesia, and they didn't know much about Papua. The only thing that they knew about Papua, that there was this separatist movement going on in Papua, and it was all bad thing that they heard. But once they come to Indonesia and come to Papua, their views almost always change 180 degrees. Surely it's not a perfect place in Indonesia or in Papua, and surely there is still flaws and challenges here and there, but it doesn't mean that all that they previously heard, and this goes to my third point about the disinformation. The information that they heard is often those peddled by ULMWP and Benny Wenda and Veronica Koman and people like that, people who spread disinformation. So I agree with you, Pache Victor, that we need to fight fake sites, fake news, and fake websites, disinformation coming from everywhere. It's not fair to the average reader, listener, and viewers when they are subjected to news that may not be accurate, or facts that are manufactured. The responsible news media source, I think, need to curate that news so that when we consume it, we know for sure the integrity of that information and the integrity of that news, and we have trust in what we read. Thank you, Pache.
Good. So more journalists with integrity coming to stories.
Sorry, no, Sir David. Sorry, I think you very close to. Thank you, Pak Sade. But what I meant before is a fake. Yeah, we agree that many fake sites and many disinformation about West Papua. It's not only from the side of ULMWP, Veronica Koman, or Benny Wenda, but also from what they call is a buzzer of Indonesia. They have a lot of sites. We found 18 sites also who spread the story, fake story about West Papua. So, okay, Professor David, we still have 20 minutes to go for our discuss. So if you have comments, I give this floor to you.
Oh, thank you. Terima kasih. I've got, yes, I had well, a couple of, yes. So what did I have? Oh yes, this relates to what you were saying a moment ago, Victor, about disinformation and sites, that sort of thing. There was that report by BBC last year about the weaponizing of social media accounts, many being removed by Facebook, and the upsurge of troll attacks on commentators and supporters of those who report or comment about self-determination, for example. So I was going to ask, what is the ministry doing about a more rational dialogue about Papua's future in response to those reports that came out last year about the BBC, the big investigation they did on disinformation sites.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a comment, Mas Ade? You're still on mute.
Can
Do
you
you have
hear
a
me?
comment? Yeah.
Yeah. I lost the last part of Professor Robbie's question, but I think it was to do with dialogue or discussion. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think, Professor, what your point for your last comment?
Yes, well, I was asking really about the investigation that the BBC did on weaponized social media, and the allegations that a number of sites had been created, particularly to weaponize social media, and what would the ministry going to do about a more rational dialogue of the future?
Okay, on your first question, Professor Robbie, about disinformation, our Ministry of Communication and Information, they are doing a lot of things to rid the internet here in Indonesia of all of those websites or content that are found to be breaking the law. So we are working on that. And on your second question of the dialogue process underway, you know, the government of Indonesia, we routinely hold discussions and consultations with Papuan representatives, which are composed of members of the regional parliaments, local governments, community, and NGOs. And in these talks, all issues are discussed openly with a view to find lasting and sustainable solutions within the framework of the unitary state of Indonesia. And I have also a question for you, Professor David Robbie. You are very concerned about the issue of self-determination, including of Papua. How about other places throughout the Pacific, in New Zealand and in other places? Are you also advocating for self-determination, sovereignty, and others?
Yes, absolutely so. That's actually a very core issue in our region generally, the process of self-determination. Even in my country, Aotearoa, New Zealand, there's a lot of process under the Treaty of Waitangi, for example, the redressing of past grievances and so on. So yes, it's a broad issue that's being raised. For example, New Caledonia, Tahiti, Polynesia, and so on. It's not certainly not Papua is not simply singled out for this. It is a broad issue that is of major concern, and not just me or others, not just to other journalists, but to the region generally. That's of course why some countries in particular, Vanuatu is one example, that sort of thing. It is a debate. It's an ongoing debate, and it's very much a big issue that's raised by the media time and time again. So it's something we have to ask questions about and address.
You mentioned about redress of the Treaty of Waitangi, and that is within the framework of the Commonwealth of New Zealand, isn't it? And just would like to make one point that Papua, the provinces of Papua and West Papua, it has been an integral part of the Republic of Indonesia since 17 August 1945, when we together declared, the Declaration of Independence, including many Papuan national heroes that fought alongside other ethnicities here in Indonesia. Now, the proclamation itself was an expression of self-determination by the Republic of Indonesia, to which included all the territories formerly colonized by the Kingdom of the Netherlands, including Papua. The international law principle of uti possidetis juris provides that whenever a colony becomes independent, the newly formed sovereign state retains the internal borders that the preceding dependent area had before their independence. Reflecting on this principle and based on the Netherlands Constitution of 1938, all territories of the Netherlands East Indies, including Papua, is part of Indonesia. So the history of Papua in Indonesia does not start from 1963, does not start from 1969, it starts from 1945.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Pasade and Professor David, we're not talking about the history or self-determination or separatism now. Yeah, we're talking about the journalism, access for media, and access for the information, and how the information from Papua land spreading out to outside to foreign country with the clear, something clear and solid. This is not fake. It's a true stories. So we need. I agree with Pasade and I also Professor David that we need more journalists to come and enter West Papua. But the problem is, like we discussed before, there's more journalists who could not come to West Papua because the problem of the visa. And as Pasade already said already, there's more often journalists who come to West Papua. There's better than before. It's like that, Pasade. So
yes, Pacha, if I may just comment on that statistics that you mentioned about our journalists, that have applied to come to Indonesia.
Yeah.
In 2016, there were 19 applications, and out of that, 15 were approved. 2017, there were 21, and 2018, there were 12, and 11 was approved. 2019, there were 16, only 7 was approved. And in 2020, there were only 1, and 1 was approved. So when you mentioned there are many, which ones exactly? Because our records show otherwise, most, as I said, 80% were approved. And if you have a problem or challenge in getting that kind of visa, please do let me know personally, and then I can talk to my colleagues here who handle the journalism visa.
Okay, thank you.
I
am the person who interviewed President Jokowi about that. When the President Jokowi delivered a statement about the West Papua is free for foreign journalists, I'm the person who interviewed him. So if there is some problem for the foreign journalists, I think I'm quite disappointed about that. So, but now I also have a question for you. It is the last question, for both of you. What's your opinion about? Sorry, it's how do you think what the Indonesian side, I mean the press or media in Indonesia, write a story about Papua for the international community? And as you are Pasade, you are staff in you are working for the foreign ministry. what's your strategy to fight the fake news or fake information who spreading out from West Papua to outside? And for Professor David, what's your? I know that you work with some journalists in Pacific. Yeah, you always write the story about the Pacific countries, especially for the Melanesia. What is your strategy to work together with them to get the what you call the right information in from the Papua? Okay, Pak Sade, you first.
Well, on your first question about media in Indonesia, including in Papua, writing about Papua, I think we should encourage more, of our own media, Jubi and Kompas and Metro and others, to write the stories coming out of Papua. And there are many interesting stories coming out from the land of Papua. And secondly, I think, Professor Robi, we could link the Indonesian media with the media in the Pacific so that they can share contents. Because it's, the journalists here in Indonesia, of course, they have easier access to Papua because of geographic distance and because of the time zones and whatnot. And then whatever stories that they write, they can exchange it and share the content with their partner in the Pacific and vice versa as well. So I think that is something that we need to encourage going forward. And on your question about the strategy to fight fake news, well, our principle is to have an open and honest policy about government issues, about development, about human rights, about any issues in Indonesia, including in Papua. The more open and honest our policy is, the better it is for us, and let the fact fight the fake news itself. So fact checking is important with an open and honest policy. Thank you, Pache.
Thank you, Sade. Okay, Professor David.
Yes, very good questions. So I should explain that we ourselves, the Pacific Media Center, we're part of the university. So we largely have journalists who either have come from other media organizations and they're doing postgraduate research and so on, or we also have students who are actually coming at the first level, then going into media industry. So we're a little bit different from ordinary news media organizations. However, that being said, we have collaborations with media in Indonesia and Papua and so on. Particularly the Jakarta Post, we've had a number of our students have gone on attachment for 6 weeks. They go to Jakarta, they have an immersion course in Bahasa Indonesian, and they are attached to the Jakarta Post or other English language medias, Metro and so on, that sort of thing. And so that certainly increases their knowledge base, not directly on Papua itself, but on Indonesia overall. And they then come back into New Zealand and go and work in the mainstream media. And so our strategy really is to try and encourage a pool of journalists, and this applies, our strategy is right across Southeast Asia, particularly the Philippines and so on as well, that the journalists are building up a pool of knowledge, and they're feeding then into the mainstream media. But as much as possible, we ourselves try on our websites, Asia Pacific Report, for example, and the PMC online, we cover as much as we are able to with our limited resources. And we find that there is actually an intense interest in anything to do with Papua. We put a lot of emphasis, as Park said, we put a lot of emphasis on fact checking and verification and so on, which all journalism should be doing. But in some cases, with mainstream media in the region, it is difficult sometimes to cross-check and verify. But certainly that's our emphasis and that's our strategy, and we hope that that might influence other media into following a similar path.
Okay, thank you, Professor David and Pak Sade. I think we are in the end of we should end we need to end this to finish this discussion. I'm sure that this is a good discussion. Yeah, we need to run and to we need to run this discussion quite often, yeah, to look what's the problem in West Papua. Yeah. I mean, because the information is the key here. When we can have a good information, right information, then we can solve the problem in our land. Especially for me, because I come from this land, yeah, and I know very well about what Pak Sade talking about before, and also Professor David's talk before is good for us to know, yeah. And I hope, like Pak Sade stated before, that if we have a problem for the visa to enter West Papua, we can talk to him directly. And also, Professor David, maybe if you, I know you quite often to Indonesia also, yeah, but you need to go to my land.
Yes, love to.
You can call Pak Sade to get the visa and come to my land. Okay, thank you very much for both of you. I'm very happy that you can come and join my discussion. I hope someday we can talk with for the other issues, but I'm always talking about the press, media, and journalism. I'm not talking about the another issues, because for me, I'm working as a journalist, and I know the one what I think about this discussion. Like this discussion is big when we have the problem for the Jakarta is information from West Papua. That's the big problem, because I know there's many fake news from West Papua. Many, not only about the separatism or violation, but also about the education, health service, corruption. It's not a fake news, but it's like the habit of journalism. Yeah. Because the journalists is they only like a bribery. Yeah. They only write the story when you give the money for them, and they can they want to write the story. So this is a big problem also in Papua. Okay. Once again, thank you very much for you, both of you, to join my discussion. I don't know what I want to talk. I want to call it talk show, but it's not pure talk show. Okay. I'm sorry for everybody who watched this discussion. I cannot deliver your question from YouTube because so many bias discussion. Sorry, so many bias question that I think it should be there only in YouTube, not in here. Thank you very much for both of you. Do you have something I give you, because we still have some time, I give you to deliver a closing statement for both of you. Professor David, you first.
Terima kasih. Well, first of all, Victor, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity for sharing in this webinar. I think it's been very constructive and worthwhile, and it's been a privilege to be part of it. And I'm pleased to meet virtually on online like this. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, likewise, I would like to echo what Professor David Robbie has said. It is an honor for me to be here in the same virtual room with you, Prof. Robbie, and also Pacha Victor. And this is a great opportunity, I think, for all of us to talk about this issue, sometimes difficult issue, but we are here together, and then we are working together to find solutions.
Hello, Pasade. We lost you again. Okay. I think we lost him again.
Whatever challenges we have of the free and fact-based. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Can you hear? Yes. So again, I just would like to thank you very much for the opportunity, and I think we should collaborate more together with media in Indonesia, and we government are more than willing and ready to assist and facilitate for that freer flow of ideas and stories between our two regions. So again, thank you very much, Pacha Victor and Professor David Robbie.
Okay. So this is the last. Thank you very much for Pasade, and thank you very much for Professor David. I hope we can meet for another time, for the next time. Then we can talk for the another issue, but with the same frame. Yeah. Thank you very much. I will end this Zoom now. But if you want to leave, you can leave now. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks so much, Victor. Really appreciate it. But, oh.